Hello and welcome to the Many Faces of Science podcast, where we discuss the different jobs that use science, the people who have them, and how they got there. We hope these episodes act as a guide for people wanting to explore more than just academia and a gateway to the curious-minded. I'm your host, Caelum, and today we're going to be chatting with scientific researcher and science communication pole dancer, Vaila Leask. If you enjoyed the episode and or found it useful, you can let us know on our social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram and TikTok. Here we go. Vaila, thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
I hope you've not had too bad of a day. It's very, very warm down here currently.
It's all right here, actually. I'd say it's a bit humid more so than anything. And I was on a bus for a lot of the day. And not going to lie, the weather in Scotland's been, as you would expect, everything in one day.
A lot then, I imagine.
Yeah, and we actually had yellow weather warnings for rain up in Aberdeenshire. And then by the time I got to Glasgow, the ground was dry. So,
Blimey.
yeah.
Really experiencing it all.
Yeah, I told you, everything in one day.
Yeah. Wonderful. So, the first question that I'm going to ask you is, what is your official job title?
So my official job title is scientific researcher, and very specifically scientific researcher for Uncover project, which is a European Union H2020 funded project.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very intrigued. So, what my next question is, what are your current job roles in that kind of role?
So I spend a lot of my time essentially reverse engineering different types of software relevant to my field. Uncover is a project which focuses on, it's called steganalysis.
Okay.
So it's the reverse process of steganography, which is similar to cryptography, which is hiding data in another form of media, essentially. So in cryptography, you're focusing on scrambling stuff. And in steganography, you're essentially making sure that you don't find the stuff. So you can scramble it and put it in something else. And that's what's kind of commonly done. So my day-to-day stuff is essentially reverse engineering stuff that you can do that with.
I didn't even that's amazing.
It's pretty cool. It's heavy coding is what I would say. But
Yeah.
it's not me writing the code a lot of the time. It's a lot of me opening up other people's work and figuring out what's going on. And I've had to do a lot of learning of different languages, like programming languages for it.
Yeah.
So I'd say my day-to-day looks a lot like, opening up these things, figuring out what's going on, writing a lot of notes for myself, essentially, and then communicating that with my partners because it's a big project.
Yeah. So is it a lot like kind of pressure testing or kind of
Testing actually not even so much. Like
okay.
we kind of have a certain category and there's only so much I can say about it because
Yeah.
it's a bit restricted. But we have certain categories that we have to look at and certain information we have to find out about the different softwares and see how they basically affect the media that we're hiding stuff in and look for signatures and how do we find them and stuff like that. So I wouldn't actually say testing, it's a lot to do more with reading. Like I really have to look at the different algorithms that are used in the code.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's long, by the way, like it takes quite a long time. It can be a bit tiring sometimes, but I actually really enjoy it because I'm learning a lot.
It seems like a lot of heavy focus and kind of as you said, you're kind of researching, kind of just a lot of reading around the topic to kind of make sure that you're focusing as much as you can.
And it's crazy because it's like you'd think that because these softwares are all kind of hypothetically doing similar things, they would kind of look similar when you open up the source code. But that's absolutely not the case. Not only are they in different languages, but every person has a different writing style and it's not necessarily commented. And then a lot of the time, it's not even actually like I have the code available to look at. So we have to use another software to kind of take it from like an actual, file that you are working with, not file, like a user interface to the machine language, and then the machine language back to something that we can read. So there's a lot going on, yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
So that's what you do in your role.
Yeah, it's kind of a lot, I know. But
there's a lot of different areas to think about.
Project.
So within that role, a kind of slightly more lighthearted, what is the most fun day you've had at work so far?
So my work's super interesting, right? Because like I mentioned, it's a big project. We have a lot of international partners And because some of the work is restricted, we can't actually talk about it online. A lot of our meetings are done online, but some of it can't be.
Yeah.
So we end up going in person to these different countries. And I think I've like I've had two main days that I would say were the most fun days. And it's mostly to do with where I was and who I was with, which are my partners in the
Yeah.
work that I can see every day. We went to Vigo in Galicia in Spain. And just doing kind of nice cultural stuff with my colleagues was part of the job because we had to go and like learn what was going on within those communities, you know?
Yeah.
And then same, I also went to Innsbruck and we went up a mountain and stuff. Like it's just doing things like this. And it's not necessarily the work itself, it's the people I'm working with.
Yeah.
And everybody's, just so excited and so driven and wanting to do their own thing. And that's the cool thing about research, you know? So it was kind of, being in these cool places with these cool people is really inspiring. And those 2 days I would say were the best ones.
They sound like great days.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Going up a mountain, being on a beach, what's not to love?
Yeah, because obviously you've got your job, but also the people that are there with you and your colleagues also make that environment so much more and
Mhm.
that job as well.
It's super interesting when everybody gets together because there's a whole mix of people too coming from different backgrounds. Like so for context, I'm actually a physicist. I have a master in physics. I'm not a computer scientist. So
Yeah,
I've come at this from an experimental physics background. And most of my colleagues are computer scientists. A lot of them are PhDs, some of them are technical partners, some law enforcement. So we know like they're kind of like the end users for what we're doing. We get all sorts of different information and different people, and it's just really, really interesting hearing about everyone's different views on these things, and the
yeah,
different angles we're approaching things. And that's what I really like about exactly these days that I'm talking about. It's the kind of going and seeing and doing all of these cool people.
yeah. Wonderful. It's really, really cool to hear about. Obviously, I've kind of never really learned about this kind of job before, so it's really interesting hearing about it, and hopefully people find it really interesting as well because I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't ever predict that I would be working in this field because I too had never heard of this field before I
Yeah.
started working in it.
My next question, which kind of links with the previous one, is what does your ideal day look like?
My ideal day. I'm actually in an interesting point in my life where I'm coming to realize that even though hypothetically I work really well at night,
Hmm.
it's better for me to be able to start working early and finish early. So my ideal day is, I wake up well rested, I have time for a nice breakfast, I get into the office and I see the people that I want to see, and I spend maybe like a couple of hours kind of doing research before actually like, speaking with anybody properly. Like lunchtime is when I would speak to people properly.
Yeah,
But I love having an early morning where I can get my head in the game and get stuff done.
yeah,
And then chilling at lunch, seeing my colleagues, and then going back to it and kind of having the afternoon to reflect over what I have done.
yeah,
And leaving, I'm not gonna lie, I like to leave early. That's why I like to start early. And then I like to separate my work by going and doing something fun. So I have a lot of other hobbies. I do a lot of dance, for example. I like sports in general, and I love cooking. So being able to switch off after the research is incredibly important for me, particularly for having motivation to want to do it the next day, for example. So that's probably when I ideal day for me. The research itself is very flexible because there's so much to do as a researcher, so many angles you can come at things from. So if I find that I'm at a good point for doing something, I really will get my head in the game. And it just depends on what I'm doing that day.
I have to say that does sound like a really, really good day. Kind of have it.
Yeah, I love having a good breakfast and seeing my colleagues. And then, like in between that, the hours just go by because you get lost in the
Yeah.
research.
What would be your kind of? Obviously, you said you love do dancing and doing sport. What?
Oh, all right. My cat has just intervened. Sorry.
To those just kind of listening in, a cat decided to introduce themselves. The cat was adorable.
Cute, but she's an attention-seeking little girl. That's the way I would describe her.
Very well described. So we've touched on this a little bit, but did you obviously you said that you weren't aware of it before you started on it. So this kind of might be interesting to answer. Did you always want to have this job, or did you want to be something else when you were younger?
It's funny for me to think about this because I even think like when I was younger, I didn't necessarily have a thing that I wanted to do. All I knew is that I didn't like the idea of doing the same thing every day. And I would like to have the opportunity to travel with work as well was something that was quite important for me. I like learning. I like keeping busy, but I value my own time is also important. So I definitely didn't plan to be a scientific researcher, but honestly, for me, it makes sense that I am one because I'm just somebody who's naturally curious.
Okay. It's really interesting hearing because a lot obviously there's so much available to people, and it's kind of can be quite overwhelming. Of just I'm not sure, but having your core, this is my kind of what I like, and this is what I'm willing to do. Can be very beneficial if you don't know what you want to do. Of okay, no, this is
Hmm.
I want to go and travel, looking at kind of those areas, and even if you
Hmm.
don't know necessarily what you want to do, working out what you're comfortable with and what you want is really kind of helps working out
Yeah.
that path.
For me, it was definitely a process of figuring out what I didn't want as well. Because for me, as I said before, it was very clear that I like doing something different every day. I like to be challenged. I like to learn. So the position that I'm in now makes sense. But I wouldn't know what my limits
Hmm.
were if I hadn't had to experience them for
Yeah,
sure. So I also have a tendency to overwork, particularly if I'm stressed. My coping mechanism is I will just get my head down and I will stay busy because the thought process is the logical one of if the work is done, I won't be stressed
yeah,
anymore. That's actually not the case. So I had to realize myself the hard way that it's important for me to put a boundary between my work life and my personal life, for example, my hobbies. And that's why I said the ideal day, I do leave earlier. I do have time to do my own stuff. And that is something that I really value about my position that I'm in,
yeah,
and something I'm always going to value and put a hard limit on, actually.
yeah. Giving yourself that time to relax and separate kind of your work from your free time, and giving yourself that time so you don't get burnout, which I feel a lot of people at the moment they're
Yeah,
overworking because they're just trying to get it, and giving yourself the space to breathe, I feel is really, really important in that.
100%. And burnout is something that I have experienced actually as a researcher, even in this position that I really like. It's really common and it just happens. And I learned the hard way. And I haven't experienced it since I learned the hard way, and that's
That's very
important.
good to hear. Has there been a person or moment which changed your career?
Um, there's been a few moments that I would say are quite important to the directions that I've taken. So, as I said, I've always known that I was curious and I liked doing stuff. When I was at university, I managed to figure out through experimental labs, just the normal kind of like third year
Yeah.
university, sort of doing experimental, maybe second year even, doing labs. I figured out that I liked working with my hands and I liked, working actually like, not just doing maths all day, for example. Like I like to mess around and find out simply. And from that, I actually decided to contact one of the members of experimental department at my university and ask if they had any places for me to do a summer internship. And that was important. That entire internship was incredibly important. And I made a lot of connections during it, which then came to be really important. And it wasn't just, confirming the fact that I like working experimentally. It was confirming the fact that I like the way that the people around me think. And so that defined that direction. But also, I gained skills from working with that department. I actually did my bachelor's project with them afterwards, that then meant that I was kind of quite a desirable candidate for a specific project working at CERN in Switzerland.
Oh,
Yes. So the experience that I had working with that experimental department meant that I was able to go, and as I say, I like traveling, move and do my research abroad. And from that specific position is how I ended up doing a PhD for a year in Belgium because those departments work very closely with each other and they were interested in if I wanted to go there. So I did. And unfortunately, it wasn't for me. It was the time was, as I say, during the pandemic. It was an isolating time. And just it wasn't quite what I thought it would be. So my mental health suffered. I made the decision to leave. Again, that was an important point for me, making the decision to leave the PhD. And that's how I ended up doing what I've been doing for the past like couple years. So, which is the
Yeah.
Steganography project, Uncover a Scientific
So
Researcher.
definitely a lot of kind of moments that
So
have
yeah,
changed.
there's the moments I would say we're deciding to do the
Yeah,
internship. And I would say also learning the stuff that I did during my bachelor's project with the same group, which got me into specifically CERN. That was a changing moment for sure. And then the connections I made at CERN got me into the nuclear physics in Belgium. And then that made me veer off of that for a little bit into steganography for the past couple of years.
definitely an interesting journey.
So I don't know how much you could say those are specific moments, but definitely doing the like deciding to do the internship was a big thing.
Definitely, there's kind of allowed you to, as you say, network and meet the people. I feel
Mhm.
it's very much from my own personal kind of. I had someone who came into a lecture at like the very end of my second year, and they did a poem, and I basically went, "That's what I want to try and do." And then I kind of end
Yeah,
up kind of snowballing. I think there can be moments that end up snowballing into something so much bigger than you thought it could have been.
yeah. I also while I was doing this kind of summer internship right at the start of it, I was supported by one of the academics at my university in a way that like I really needed at the time. I had been going through some personal stuff, and I I kind of was really struggling with imposter syndrome even back then. And he essentially vouched for me and said that, you know, my grades didn't actually reflect my capabilities just because he believed in me. And like that alone, because he was saying this to funding bodies actually, not to me directly. Um, that alone was enough to make me believe that I should be there, you
Yeah.
know? He was a very important person for sure. And also my supervisor when I worked at CERN, again, great person, made me want to stay in science. And the people that I've worked with over the past couple of years, there's always people who inspire me. That's the lovely thing actually about research. When you're in a positive community, you will find people that will inspire you around every corner.
That's really lovely to hear because I know,
But that first person was very important for
yeah,
sure. And also a few other members of the academic staff at my university were exactly as supportive, and I needed that, and it's worked wonders for me.
it's really, really good to hear that you had a good support network there. It was really, really love to hear about that.
Yeah.
Also, talking about CERN, I know they've got, because they occasionally things come up, the amount of internships that they have for different people. I'd highly recommend people listening to go and have a look at those if you're interested in CERN, because they have stuff for so many different types of science, which I find really
Mhm.
interesting.
So again, like as a physicist, the skills that actually were applicable to what I was doing there was I had done serial communication programming in
Yeah.
Python. I had made a video game for my bachelor's
Hmm.
project that basically explained how an optical magnetometer works. That's
Okay.
a very technical term, I
Yeah.
know. But it was basically you move a magnet around and it detects the heartbeat of a cow in this video game with this, graphic
Yeah.
interface. And I was doing that with a little I think it was a GameCube controller that I had actually. I can't remember what it was, but it was with a controller and I had to write all the commands for it and make the game. And then that actually was applicable to I was making a temperature controller at CERN for a laser system. And I had had laser experience also from the same department and this serial communication experience. So those two skills particularly were exactly what was
Yeah.
applicable. And again, I'm a physicist, but the thing that was interesting here was the programming and the specific type of programming.
So that kind of links with another question that I have, which is, yeah, was there something from your past that you unexpectedly use in your current role or maybe a previous role? I think we've talked about that a bit. Are there any things from your past that you used in your current role that was unexpected as well, that they were kind of useful?
So I ended up in the position I was in because and currently in is because because of this programming
Yeah.
experience. And because I like programming as well, and I always wanted to like learn how to program like a programmer and not like a physicist, because I mean it's kind of known in science that in general we just kind of make things
Yeah.
work. We don't really mind so much about the structure. We comment it so that we know what we're doing, but it's just to make it work essentially. And I wanted to know the most efficient ways to do this, and that kind of led me to be a bit more interested in computer science. Um, and I was never actually taught Python at university, I should say. I was taught MATLAB. But I had to do Python for this video game that I was doing in the bachelor's project. So I went and learned it by myself with YouTube videos. And then that's ended up being the important thing of what I was doing in
Yeah.
Belgium from watching Python videos,
The
essentially.
power of YouTube. Honestly, I think
It's quite
you
crazy,
can learn
right?
basically anything on there.
Yeah, exactly. And Python is actually a really great language because it is so accessible. It's a really great starting point for anybody who's thinking about getting into programming because very quickly, if you want to look at another language, you can say, oh, this looks similar to this, and you can kind of build a foundation from that.
Yeah.
So Python was I didn't realize exactly how useful it was going to be.
Yeah, I've got a friend who works in kind of data security, and he's just like, learn Python, you will thank me later. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm interested in other languages now as well, but I would not change the order in which I've done
Yeah.
it. Python was a brilliant way to get me really working with programming other than,
Yeah.
MATLAB.
So I feel we've covered the next question, which was how did you, or you may want to expand on it potentially, of how did you get the current role you are in?
I can actually tell you a story about the interview because that was quite an interesting experience for me. So I had decided to leave the PhD before I had found another
Hmm.
position because for me, at the end of the day, I was simply unhappy and I had to give a 3 months notice. So for me, 3 months was probably long enough for me to be able to find something else while I was out in
Yeah.
Belgium. And I didn't feel quite finished with Belgium yet. I wanted to stay in that country. I wanted to explore a little bit more being in mainland Europe. So I knew I was going to stay there and I was going to look around, that kind of region. And I saw this position that I'm currently in, and it just looked interesting, scientific researcher. That's literally what I wanted to do, in this field that I'd never heard of, steganography. And I was reading the description, and all they were looking for was somebody with a master's degree in science, essentially, and good experience in programming, and also they made a point about being good at communicating with a large consortium, essentially, like being able to say what you've done, what you're going to do, and where you see it going, sort of thing, and make that
Yeah.
clear. So I thought, why not apply for it? It's there. I was on LinkedIn that I saw it actually. And I pretty quickly got an email back from them offering me an interview, which was really nice. But what I had to do for the interview was they sent me across a paper and I had to make I think it was a 10-minute presentation that they wanted me to make, as well with 10 minutes afterwards for questions and kind of discussions and stuff like that. And I'm not going to lie to you, I did not understand what the title of the paper meant. I did not understand what the paper was about. I had not a Scooby about what was going on about it. So I spent, and this the interview was about 2 weeks away. Like it was a very short turnover
Yeah.
time. And I spent 1 week of that 2 weeks just figuring out what that title of the paper even meant. And when I tell you, I was like digging and digging through papers and contacting all of my computer science friends, asking what they would probably consider simple questions. But I had to do it to make this presentation. So I did it. And eventually, after about a week, I kind of knew enough to be able to read the
Yeah.
paper, which was nice. And I had to then make this presentation. I would say that I do value my presentation skills. I like giving presentations and I always want them to be clear to everybody in the room. And so I spend a lot of time making sure that I'm describing things in exactly the way that I want to be describing them and hoping that the communication is,
Yeah.
good with that. So I then made the presentation and I worked on it. I made it aesthetically pleasing. I had the, kind of words that I wanted to say put out there, and also made sure to not go into detail, sorry, about the stuff that I knew I didn't know as well. And I made this to the point where I thought, okay, this is the best I can do. This is what I can offer them. And this is me showing my skills that I have, talking about it in a way that I'm interested too. And so I gave them the presentation, and they were really, really impressed with it because I had done exactly that. I explained what I knew, and I explained where I had thoughts about other stuff within the paper, and also the directions that, like, kind of my instincts told me you could maybe investigate more in, and also where I had questions, the parts that I didn't understand. Um, and they were more than happy with that. They were super, super happy with like how I had done it, and I kept it within the 10 minutes. That's also
Yeah.
important, by the way. Um, so we then talked again for like 10 minutes or so after. And I openly admitted to them that I had no idea what the paper was about. I really had to spend those 2 weeks researching. And they were also happy with that as well. And so in the end, the reason they hired me over other people they had interviewed was because I had communicated effectively exactly what I understood and what I didn't understand and where I saw it going. So at the end of the day, it actually had nothing to do with like, my background specifically being like a physicist. Obviously, that was important because I can make experiments and stuff like that. It was more to do with me being passionate about reading about the subject and going and finding out what I could and making them aware of the fact that this is what I don't understand. And that was a brilliant place for me starting in this scientific researcher position because we can go every direction from that. So that was actually like how I got that job was specifically, I would say communication more so than anything.
Yeah, I definitely feel that it's very, very important to be honest about, I don't know how to do something, but I feel they probably really valued you being honest rather than trying to fluff around it or try and get somewhere. It's just like, no, generally, I don't know, because that also means that there's a level of trust there that you've built of you're
Mhm.
being very honest with them rather than you're not hiding anything, I think, which is quite very important.
Exactly. I also wasn't afraid to ask
Yeah,
questions. And don't get me wrong, I think I interviewed quite well. I was told in the feedback afterwards that I came across very confidently and, not too confident, but very confident and smiley, happy to be there. But I was so terrified. Like I don't think they saw, but like my legs were shaking during the presentation just because I was like nervous. And I think it's a case of for me, fake it till you make it sort of thing in those situations. So I did kind of have to push through. But I would say it was a really pleasant interview experience, actually. And having just conversations with them after was
yeah.
lovely. Really, one of the scientific researchers, he looked at the extended information on my CV, and I actually worked in a cat cafe when I was living in Glasgow. And he wanted to know about that. He was like, "What is this?" And I'm like, "Well, it's a cafe with cats." And he's like, "Interesting," you know? So it's cool that, you talk to these people on a personal level, not just a scientific
Yeah.
level. I really like
I had
that.
an interview recently where, because on the bottom of my CV, I used to teach ballroom dancing at uni for part of it, and they just went,
Oh, that's
"Oh,
super
what like
cool.
was your favorite ballroom like dance? What's your favorite Latin dance?" Because they just started learning lessons, and so we had like a really nice conversation chat. I mean, it didn't go towards the job, which didn't end up getting, but it was just really nice to kind of have that conversation rather than
Hmm.
it just kind of being us and them. No, it's like more of a conversation, which I feel is really good.
Exactly. And I still like I have a really good relationship with this
Yeah.
researcher. He's an older guy. He's probably going to be retiring soon. But it was just nice to tell him what a cat cafe was.
I've been meaning to visit the one in Glasgow. Actually, my girlfriend's been like, I must take you.
Hmm.
So we've talked about the importance of kind of networking generally, but was there any internship? Well, we've talked about the kind of summer internship that you kind of did. But are there any other internships, training courses, volunteer work, or previous roles that you did which helped you get to your current role? We've talked about it a bit, but if there's any that we haven't covered, do you want to talk about?
I'm trying to think what other kind of trainings I have specifically done that would have been relevant to this position. Because I feel that with everything that I've done, there's always like some sort of training with every job that you kind of
Yeah,
do. Um, in all honesty, I think just getting out there and speaking to people is the base groundwork of everything that I've done. And just showing passion and enthusiasm has got me a long
yeah.
way. And just asking questions as well. And it's not like, as I say, I know that's not an an internship. There's not an internship in asking questions, but that I think was the most important thing that I've done.
I mean, thank you for your honesty with it. Um,
I don't, sorry, I'm trying to think
no,
if I've done any other kind of trainings, but I don't think I have. Other than, as I say, I watched a
yeah,
lot of YouTube videos on
yeah.
Python.
Well, no, it's always obviously the focus of this is learning about how people got their roles,
Hmm.
and yes, I think talking to people and not being afraid to ask questions is really really important. I mean, that's how I've you came to be on this podcast. Is I put a message out and then you responded, which is thank you for again.
Yeah, no problem.
If you so then thinking about if you were to do it again, are there now any internships, training courses, volunteer work, or previous roles that you would do now that you didn't do?
Not that I can think of. The thing is, another thing I've realized is that I do really love scientific outreach, and I've been better at putting myself out there for scientific research as I've gotten older, for
Yeah.
sure. I think when I was at university, I was maybe too stressed to be doing it as much as I am now. And it took kind of a certain amount of personal growth to want to go out there and put myself out there a little bit more. But I don't think doing more at the time would have been the right thing for me.
Okay.
I think, yeah, I think that the way that I've done things has been in line with my own personal growth, and in that way, it's worked really nicely for
Yeah.
me. And I'm trying to think if there's any other kind of like trainings or something. I'd always love to be better at programming. I've told you, I always want to be better and feel like I should be doing more with that. But another thing that I've learned, as I said, is taking a break is important, and I can't always be getting on at myself to be doing better 100% of the time, because otherwise I'll just be sitting watching, coding videos in all my spare time, and that's cool for some people, but I need to take a break sometimes.
Definitely. Definitely.
And that's helped me a lot more just with a better, healthy
Yeah.
mindset. My mental health is much better.
I'm really glad to hear that you've taken all the steps and you found the path that you wanted and was also suited you. It's yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's yeah.
It's actually like when you ask that question specifically, I think I've not really had very much time to be going and doing any other trainings other than my university stuff, because it has been pretty much since I started university, the ball has been rolling and never
Yeah.
stopped, you know? But I did ask questions a lot about the directions I could be going, and that's why I've ended up with this strange arc, I
Yeah.
guess.
So less kind of talking about internships, but more, were there any kind of networking events, mailing lists, groups, got guilds in there? Because I don't know a lot about guilds or associations that you feel were particularly helpful. Obviously, we've kind of, based on our previous thing, there may not have been, but if there were, are there any that you could think of?
I've not attended very many specific networking events for, like
Yeah.
jobs, but I have attended networking events for representation of women in science and representation of just particularly women in
Yeah.
physics. And something that I thought was incredibly cool is that there's now a society at my university specifically for women in physics. And I've found that a very validating and very safe space, because it's really nice to know that I'm not the only one that kind of like, I mean, I feel imposter syndrome a lot. But very specifically, like it's good to know that like people feel very
Yeah.
similar, who are like in a similar position. It's simply like being a woman in science is there's not always that many of us, and it's getting better, definitely. But I do remember that in my kind of first year of university, there was something like 150 people and maybe maximum eight
Yeah.
girls. So it's like, and that number kind of just got smaller and smaller, I think, as well. Like I can't remember entirely, but it definitely was not 50-50. So seeing the representation of, like women in science and being able to connect with people through that definitely made me feel a lot more comfortable in my field. So it wasn't a case of actually finding the jobs for these positions. It was validating that I should be
Yeah,
there,
definitely.
you know? And that, in my opinion, is quite important.
Definitely. I think there's quite a lot of networks that are kind of starting to show up to kind of supporting
Hmm.
women in science. I know there's I can't remember the exact name. I need to search it up. But kind of getting girls doing coding. I know kind of in Norwich there's very much trying to go into schools to try and do clubs to kind of get girls confident in coding, because it is quite a male kind of heavy area, kind of allowing people the representation of, no, this is something that you can do, and giving people the confidence, I think is really, 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 really beneficial.
Yeah, exactly. It's just nice to have a safe space,
Yeah.
a space where you feel valued. So that I would say is very important for me, and that was a very important kind of net. I guess it is a form of
Yeah.
networking, you know?
Yeah. Networking just not in no doesn't even need to have to be just for jobs, but just having a space where you feel comfortable is, I feel, really, really important. Yeah.
Yeah, it meant that I felt like I had 2 feet in the
Yeah.
community, is the way I would describe it. It felt like I should be
Yeah.
there, and you need to feel like you're going to be somewhere if you're going to pursue a career there, you know?
Definitely.
So I would say actually, like for any other like women who would listen to this, if there are these kind of societies around you, go to them, make the connections. speak to people, have the experiences. It's worth it.
What would be the best way that you would think about or recommend for people finding them? Is it more kind of searching online or through Facebook? Are there any specific type of social media that is generally best for finding these groups?
So for finding these groups, mine was through my
Okay.
university. University is usually a really good one. But then for even younger than that, a lot of youth centers do tend to do stuff like this. In smaller communities, probably not so much, but in cities, definitely. There will be like, kind of like out of like office hours, like I guess like after school stuff as well, where you can go and like go for like science clubs or something like that. These things are all there and there will be resources for them. And I think for the social media for going to get them, I think Googling is literally probably the
Yeah.
best. I personally don't even use Facebook.
Yeah, no, a lot of
So
people are going away from kind of using a lot of the more traditional social medias. They're kind of
yeah.
talking into.
So yeah, I do use Instagram a lot, but trying to find like for example like a society or something on Instagram without necessarily knowing what you're looking for, the algorithm doesn't make it particularly easy unless you know the actual
Yeah.
name. So like you can't just be like when you Google things and you can be like, Science Club in Glasgow. Typing that into the Instagram bar is not going to do very much for you. So I would say just Google
Yeah.
it, honestly. Look around, ask around. If you know somebody in the like kind of field, if you know anybody doing anything, something similar, ask them. Maybe it's useless, but worst case scenario, you've asked, you now know not to ask them
Yeah.
again. That's the way I'd say it, at least.
Yeah, definitely supporting people and having a space that everyone feels welcome. So my next question, which you may have an answer to, you may not, and that's entirely fine either way. Are there any graduate jobs that now exist in the industry that you feel would be beneficial for someone looking to get into the kind of career you're in?
So the kind of career I'm in, I don't know if there really are graduate jobs necessarily for
Yeah,
it. I'm actually in a pretty interesting position where like I am a scientific researcher, but I haven't done a
yeah,
PhD. Like I haven't finished a PhD yet. Um, and as I said, like I'll hands up and say I dropped out of a
yeah,
PhD because it wasn't for me. But it was hard enough for me just, like deciding I still want to stay in research, but not go straight back to the PhD. But I think a lot of people like in just scientific research positions do have a PhD. It's not necessarily mandatory, but I don't know what kind of graduate opportunities there are for people who are, coming out with like a bachelor's or an honors or a master's um into any kind of research, to be honest. And steganography is a particularly niche
yeah.
field, you know? I really feel that I kind of landed in this job as like circumstance.
Thank you for your honesty. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoy it and I'm glad that it happened, but it's not a job that I think is coming up that
yeah.
often.
I mean, that's why my plan of interviewing people to find the jobs that you don't necessarily think about or people aren't generally aware about.
Mhm. I found it on LinkedIn. I really was just I think I typed in something like researcher in
Yeah,
LinkedIn because I still wanted to do research and there are research opportunities for people, but specifically like, kind of in a field where you're publishing papers and stuff like that, an academic, because I'm still kind of working in an academic sense. It's just not as a PhD
yeah,
researcher, it's just as a scientific researcher, you
yeah,
know? The difference here is that I'm not pursuing a PhD
yeah.
at this point. But yeah, like I think a lot of other researcher positions are more kind of industry oriented, so they're not publishing so much. It's not finding kind of necessarily new stuff. It's kind of a lot of the time fixing problems is the way I think. I don't know. I could be making that up entirely. I've never worked in that field.
So you've kind of mentioned your dancing, and you've we kind of had a conversation a bit about dancing and science. Do you combine the two of them, or is it just kind of one or the other?
Yeah, so another really cool thing I did while I was studying my physics degree is I founded the pole dancing society at my university with two of my best friends actually, and it was a really, really cool year because it was a good success. It was
Yeah,
fantastic. People loved it and loved it. We were having a lovely time. And I am so passionate about pole dance. It's so challenging for me and it comes with a lot of kind of activism issues that I feel really strongly about, a lot to do with feminism and different workers' rights and a lot of this sort of
yeah,
stuff. So that's something that really drives me. While simultaneously, I'm really driven by science and science communication because I believe that everybody should be allowed to do science if they want to do science. Like in my opinion, science is kind of just, the act of us trying to understand everything. And that is a intrinsically human thing. We all want to do that to some degree. And so everyone should do it. And so combining these kind of like two, I'd say almost activism issues, both of them, was something that I thought would be quite interesting. And I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to do this because I was asked to be a pole dancing performer for a science communication event.
Ooh.
It was online,
Mm-hmm.
which was really cool. So I got to make like a pole dancing video where I would explain a scientific concept. And I know like a lot of people are probably thinking is like how do you do that? Like how do you demonstrate something with a pole dance? And I kind of did it in some ways. I did demonstrate in some ways with it. But it was a lot to do with trying to get clever about how you're going to, overlay different types of film to demonstrate different kind of things going on. So for example, I was talking about kind of superposition, quantum superposition, where something is neither in one state or another, but kind of technically both at the same
Yeah.
time. And while I did that, I did this repetitive pole dancing move and overlaid it with each other. So it was kind of like, wavy and going back and forth and not necessarily doing one thing at a time. And it was lots of things to look at. Um, so I made this entire video where I explained what Schrodinger's cat essentially is, and it gave me the opportunity to, do some pole dancing, have a cool kind of like Schrodinger's like dead and alive cat costume, and just explain these concepts with something interesting going on in the video that isn't just, like a diagram.
Yeah.
And having the opportunity to do that was so, so cool. And I had so much fun doing it. So when they asked me to do it a second time, it was just amazing. And I was able to use my kind of newfound knowledge from being in the field of steganography to do one about cryptography. And that was also really cool. And it's something that I'm personally going to pursue more. I'm planning on actually kind of starting either an Instagram account or a TikTok account where I do shorts of this sort of stuff, explaining scientific concepts with pole dance going on, because it's worked beautifully. I've had a lot of contact about it, and I think I'm going to keep doing it.
Interestingly, I think I've seen that because I think that was part of the same Science as a Drag show that I was part of.
Ah, that's really
Yeah,
cool.
because you were talking about it, and my brain went, "I remember this because you were the first video that was on for that one." I think yeah,
Was it the Schrodinger's cat one?
I think it was the coding one that I saw.
Ah, the
The
cryptography
cryptography
one.
one, yeah, because I did a drag one about capybaras.
Oh, that
That
was
was me.
you. You're the
Yeah, the
capybara guy.
capybara guy.
Ah, I love that. I love German, by
Thank
the way.
you.
I also love capybaras.
Yeah, that was just going through my mind of. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, yeah.
Hey, that's so
Shout,
cool.
shout,
It's nice to like properly meet
it's nice
you.
to probably meet you too. Shout out to other listeners. If you don't know what Science is a Drag is, I'd highly recommend going and checking out the many, many years that are on YouTube, like performances that are on YouTube. They're brilliant. Highly recommend watching them. Brilliant examples of science communication with a bit of a laugh.
Yeah, they're fantastic. I had so much fun, and I also met so many people through that. I would consider that networking.
Yeah, I would definitely consider that networking.
Exactly. So, I mean, we're sitting here right now,
Yeah,
aren't we?
definitely. Yeah, yes. Well, yeah. I need to go back and watch many of those performances because they were brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
completely. Some of them had me like in actual stitches. Some people are so funny.
Yeah, I had a couple of my housemates just kind of look at me very strangely when I walked out afterwards, just like, "Are you okay?" Just like, "Yeah, I just had an amazing time."
Yeah.
So that is all of my questions asked, and it's really lovely to finally meet you in person after
And
after being on
you,
the
this was
same show.
lovely.
Um, Kind of rounding off the interview, are you happy for people to contact you to kind of ask for advice or discuss your role? You can say no, that's entirely fine. Um,
Yeah, that's more than okay with me.
and if so, what is your preferred method of contact?
My preferred method of contact is either through
Hmm.
Instagram or email. So, do you want me just to like read my handles
Yeah, if
or?
you'd read the handles, I'll also put it on the video as well.
Okay, perfect. So it's for Instagram, it's at Ula Laser, Ula Laser. It's a nice pole dancing laser thing. I do a lot of lasery stuff as well. Um, and that's U as in OOH. And then my email is vaila.leask@proton.me.
No, and I will put those like in a little box so everyone can understand them. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
all that there is left is for me to thank you for coming on the show. It's been really, really wonderful. And I've learned about a job and career that I didn't even know existed, if I'm honest with you. I understood cryptography, but I didn't understand... How do you pronounce it again?
Steganography, like Stegosaurus.
Steganography like Stegosaurus. That is how that is going to stay in my mind.
It's actually coming from the same thing. So cryptography literally means like hidden writing. And steganography means covered writing. And Stegosaurus is covered lizard.
You honestly learn a new thing every day.
Well, yeah, it's quite cool when you go back into like how these things are actually like named and where it comes from. But they're sister fields, I would say, cryptography and steganography. They're very similar. But most people don't know about steganography because it's definitely newer. I mean, or the research into it is definitely newer. I'd say papers are only in the past 20 years or so.
Yeah. Kind of finding things. The only thing that I can kind of compare it to is when you're trying to like find the different items or kind of, I really need to research more about this because it seems fascinating.
So, it is really just hiding one file in another file. A really common one is a text file in an image.
Yeah.
And the way that that's done, and kind of like an example of one of the ways it can be done, is you literally just change the least significant bit per pixel. So you know how every pixel is made up of 8 bits? You will change the least significant one with a text file bit. So the information is simply just replaced. And because it's the least significant bit, it makes almost no difference visually. Well, it makes absolutely no difference visually. We can't see it with our eyes to the picture itself. So the data's changed, but it looks almost entirely the same because we're only messing around with the stuff that does very little changes.
That is genuinely fascinating. I would highly recommend everyone goes and checks out this career because it seems very, very cool. And my main thing is like, ooh, spies.
Well, yeah, it's for law enforcement.
Well, yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And for everyone who is interested, is there anything that you would like to promote for people to go and look at?
You put me on the spot here. There's lots of things I want people to go and look at, but I can't think off the top of my head.
If you
go to my Instagram, I do a lot of activism there.
If you have message send me a list and I will put different links to the different things as well as in the description of the video. And I also put stuff on the Twitter when I tweet about and kind of all of that stuff. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Very welcome. This is here not just for people listening to finding out about different careers, but also as a place for people to be discovered and promoting people as well, as people need to be held up and representation shown. And this is here as a safe space for everyone who comes on. So, yeah, you're very welcome.
Thank you. It's been lovely speaking with you today.
Speaking with you too. Right, to all the listeners, I will see you you will hear me in the next episode. And I look forward to being with you then. Bye. Hi everyone.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed the episode. I certainly enjoyed making it. If you've got any questions, feedback, or recommendations for who you'd like us to talk to, you can send them to our email, themanyfacesofscience@gmail.com. Or you can contact us via our socials on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. See you next time.